When you describe Death Stranding to someone who isn't familiar with it, it sounds boring. A game about walking to deliver packages with little combat? Who would want to play that? Well, thanks to its superb execution, the answer is a lot of people. It approaches traversal with the same depth that Devil May Cry approaches combat, or Fire Emblem approaches strategy. I don't know what's more surprising, the fact that Death Stranding focuses itself entirely around traversal, or that it's one of the only mainstream games to do so. And not only that, but it has the talent of taking many of the conventions of modern AAA games and turning them upside down. So many big budget 3D games take up a lot of your time with walking from objective to objective, especially in open world titles. But for many of these, movement is just a glorified cutscene. The only interactivity you're getting is holding the analog stick up. Death Stranding says, hey, instead of making you go from point A to point B to get to your objective, how about we make that the entire game? That's the big difference between this game and others. In most titles where shooting or sword fighting is the crux of the gameplay, walking just gets in the way. Versus here, entering into combat with mules or sneaking around BTs gets in the way of your walking. So many other games have the player craving action, but in Death Stranding, you're trying to actively avoid it. The world of the game is pretty barren, but that makes sense in the context of the story, and it serves the gameplay well. There's no shortage of games with massive, empty open worlds, but many try to create the illusion of content through the use of repetitive tasks and useless collectibles. Death Stranding makes no effort to present itself as anything other than exactly what it is. The world is empty because it keeps you focused on reaching your goal with minimal distractions. There's lost cargo and materials you can pick up, but there's no moments where you'll see a landmark off in the distance and feel drawn towards it, away from your destination. The route you take to deliver a package is another element of current games that Death Stranding takes and completely turns on its head. In many other titles, you get a mission, set a marker on a map, and then a magic line is created for you to follow along, with no risk of getting lost or going off track. But here, the game puts it upon you to figure out your route. You plot it out on the map and then follow along the path that you chose. And guess what? Sometimes you'll mess up. You might end up in a mule or BT area, on top of a cliff with no way down, or blocked off by a river. But it's so refreshing to play a game that lets you get lost. Sure, you might make mistakes, but each one is a new learning experience and a new challenge to overcome. When even a lot of open world games now feel very on rails, Death Stranding breaks the mold completely. The inventory is also done in a way that very few other games will be bold enough to attempt. Instead of the items you carry disappearing into the void and maybe counting towards some entirely unrealistic weight limit, each item takes up physical space on your character model. You can choose exactly where to carry it, and you have to be careful about how much you're going to weigh yourself down when traveling. This might sound cumbersome, but it gives each item so much more importance. For each one, you have to consider, do I really need this? It plays in perfectly with choosing your route on the map. Decide your path, pick out your gear, and then make it happen. Each delivery feels like you're actually accomplishing it. So many game designers are afraid of annoying the player. The fact that you can trip over a rock when walking in Death Stranding does sound like a pain, but it gives your environment so much more purpose. The world isn't just a setting for you to run into enemies and battle them. Every inch of it can affect you in one way or another, which gives it much more meaning than other games. Now, I haven't even mentioned the online aspect, where structures that other players build can show up in your game. That's because while I think this is a really clever addition that adds a lot to the world, to me, that's not what the meat of Death Stranding is. What makes the game work is that it focuses all its systems around a style of gameplay that's not seen in other mainstream games. Traversal. Sure, it has a lot of things other AAA games have, like shooting and crafting, but they're not what the game is about. The game is about walking, and approaches it with a level of originality that's rarely seen in a game with this budget. And that's what makes Death Stranding great. It brings something new to the table. But even as much as I've loved the game, if someone told me they played it and hated it, I would completely understand. It's not a game for everyone. But really, it doesn't have to be. Too many games fall into the jack of all trades, master of none syndrome, and oftentimes what you get feels watered down and uninspired. Of course, games have to make a profit at the end of the day, and most don't have the hype of a name like Hideo Kojima behind them, but I hope that more game designers can focus on doing one thing well, rather than trying to appeal to everyone, because when you focus on making something that players can't get anywhere else, you can end up with something as unique, original, and compelling as Death Stranding.